Well, by the sound of that tune, you know it's time for DBA760, Strategic Decision Making for Managers. This video is concerned with Week 2 assignments and a little bit of information about what I'm looking for in papers. So let's get started. The main topic for this week is going to be investigating strategic management through the eyes of Henry Mintzberg. Now, Mintzberg is more known for his work with the roles of managers, but he's been around a long time and is considered kind of a management authority in the same vein as Chandler and Ansoff and others who've kind of been around, seen it develop, over the past 30 or 40 years. Mintzberg is still alive and still writing. And I like to start with him because he provides kind of a different viewpoint than most of us are familiar with based upon previous courses in strategy that we might have had, which concentrate on the SWOT analysis and Porter's 5 forces. Mintzberg's view is somewhat different, and I think it's a good place to start because it kind of gives us a reinforcement about Week 1, which was, well, is this really even a field? Or, are we talking about all different things? So, the required readings are here, and most of these are either coming from Mintzberg himself or people writing about Mintzberg's perspective. Okay, so as usual, these are required. Start with a couple of them so you get in your early post by Tuesday, and then during the week continue to read and develop your broader understanding of what's going on. I also might mention that Mintzberg, as I said, is still alive, and it's useful to go into YouTube and just Google on Henry Mintzberg, and you'll find a number of videos about interviews with him. And I think it's interesting to learn a little bit more about the personality behind the writings, because we generally only see people in terms of academics, at least in terms of what they've written and published, and we don't really know, who it is. Where we spend a lot of time, trying to figure out, well, who's Jeff Bezos and who's Mark Zuckerberg and who is Steve Jobs, and so we spend a lot of time kind of looking at the personalities of business leaders, but we really don't spend much time trying to understand the personalities of the academic leaders. And so I think it's if we have access to that type of information, it's useful. So the assignments for this week are both a discussion and a paper. The discussion topic, as you might expect, is talking about the Mintzberg school or perspective on strategic management. And again, I'd like to stay kind of focused on that aspect of Mintzberg's work and ideas and not get into some of the other areas that he's commented upon. So again, we try to keep the topics focused, and that's why I supply the required readings so that we're all looking at the same thing, and when we go into the discussion, we're talking about the same articles. Now afterwards, you can add more things in. You can find more articles. That's kind of the whole point. But I do want to stick around the main required articles because it just is more efficient for the discussion if we're talking about the same thing. There's enough to talk about within the same set of readings as opposed to adding in other things that other people probably won't even look at. Okay, so the discussion topic is here. The first week was good. I thought we started out strong. The ongoing discussion during the week was what I was looking for. We're actually picking on particular aspects of the articles of the literature and discussing those and trying to winnow out what the real meaning is and how one idea differs from another. So that's exactly the point. That's exactly the way discussions are supposed to work. The paper is the first of a series that we'll be writing during this class. And this is a 5 to 7 page one, not a real long one, but none of the papers in this class, are the 35-page long variety. I don't find that very useful in terms of learning or teaching or improving students' writing abilities. So we're going to have an early 5 to 7 page paper, and it's going to cover the material from the first 2 weeks of class. Okay, so in addition to the required readings, I want to see at least 5 additional peer-reviewed journal articles included on your paper. And a little break from tradition here, what I'd like you to do is, since the new papers, we may not have time to go look into each one of those, include at the end of the paper, down with the reference list, the abstracts. So just when you put in the line for the reference, which journal it came from, who the authors were, and so on, just copy and paste the abstract in at that same part so that it's easy for me then to look at what the article was actually talking about and how you utilize that as part of your paper. I've supplied some writing resources in the Start Here section. These again are videos that talk about the value of peer-reviewed journal articles, what they are, why they're there, why we use them, and also some background on the general concepts of scholarly writing. Now, another change that's occurred recently over break was what we used to call GROWS, the Graduate Resource Online Writing Studio, has now gone to a different website, and I'll put that in the discussion portion of the class. And they don't want to be called GROWS anymore. They want to be called the Online Writing Studio or the Graduate Online Writing Studio. So there's a couple of changes going on. How you get to them is different than it was before, and they have a number of policy changes. But they're still a good resource. I think they've expanded their usefulness to the graduate school and to especially to dissertation students. And I think that this is, again, something that you should make use of if you're not familiar with it. If you haven't used it, you ought to just try it out and see how it works. Okay, again, these videos are in the Start Here section of the class. So, a little background. Again, I mentioned the same things in all classes because writing obviously is one of the more important things you're going to do as an academic. So, what you need to do is learn to use the literature to build a foundation for whatever your idea is going to be. So you don't start out with your idea and then look for things to support that. You start out with what the literature says, and then you develop your understanding and your perspective based on that. When we deal with literature, as we will in this first assignment, the idea isn't simply to write a book report about what the article said. That's not the intent. That's a very low level of learning, and it simply says, yes, I read the article and here's what it says. So I'm rephrasing the abstract. What you got to do is see how the different articles and perspectives compare together. So you're dragging information out of the articles, the main ideas, and then you're putting them together with the other ideas from the other articles to kind of build your position, to find out what you want to say about it. And so the originality or creativity that you're going to be supplying is how you combine the ideas that you're taking from the literature. Okay. And of course, you always have to reference things. Okay, so these are the main keys. Now, what I've done a little bit differently in my last class, and that what I'll be using in future classes, I've started using what I call an assessment guide and rubric. And I call it a guide because it's meant to help students develop their papers according to a format that I use to grade it. Now, I know there's other rubrics out there being used in other classes, but this one I developed because this suits my style and also what I'm looking for. As Lisa says, writing is not a simple thing, and it takes practice, it takes feedback, it takes guidance for you to get to the level that you need to be at when you're writing your dissertation. So in a sense, everything we're doing here is part of the development process for doing a dissertation. What I've done in my rubric and my guide is to lay out the basic areas that I use when I grade a paper. Okay, so first thing I do when I open it up, I look at the quantitative requirements. Is it the right number of pages? And number of pages does not count the title page. It does not count the reference list. It's got the body of the paper should be in the page between the page minimum and maximum number of pages. I look at the reference list. You have a sufficient number of references for what you're trying to do. I also notice whether the references are actually utilized inside the paper. So sometimes I get papers where there's 35 references, but only 4 are used in the paper. Well, that's not the idea. The references are supposed to come after the paper is written, and then you write down the ones you used. As papers stay on topic, I get some very interesting papers about topics that don't fit into what we're trying to talk about. So I'll quickly judge that, and many times just send a paper back and say, this wasn't the topic, you didn't look at the assignment, I don't know where this came from. And was it turned in on time? So we have a penalty associated with late work. And here I'll just check and note which things were right and which things were wrong about it. If everything was right, I'll just say, yes, it was fine. Is the form and structure correct? Every paper should have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. The body of the paper should have headings that indicate the different sections. Okay, and again, I'll go through and just kind of look at it. Is it set up right? Does it look right? Does it look like the journal articles that we're reading? That's what your papers are supposed to look like. And you'll notice nearly every one of those universally has a section called the introduction, has a body with different sections and subsections within it, and it'll have a conclusion. You should have the same things. That's what your papers should look like. And again, I'll note if you're missing something. If you're doing it fine, I'll simply say yes. So it speeds up the process for me, rather than say, yes, you wrote a great introduction, or this was, a fabulous organization for your paper. I simply say, yes, this was fine. If it's wrong, then I'll make notes about what needs to be changed. Moving on, now we're getting kind of into the writing style and the mechanics itself. And at a doctoral level, we expect it to be pretty good. Incorrect grammar, spell checking that's still wrong when it gets sent to me, it's still got the red squiggly line under it. Those are just unacceptable. You can't do that. And you got to practice, not allowing yourself to turn in work that isn't at the right level of quality. It's different than what you would write for high school. It's different than what you would write for a undergraduate program. So a number of the things that I look for, of course, are basic spelling, punctuation, grammar. Avoid using jargon. Are you using the right words? Sometimes people will use something and maybe they think the word means something, but it doesn't really mean that. So I'll look at the choice of words. Are you using in-text references correctly? And also, there's a particular formal style that we expect that isn't necessarily the right way. It's one way to write. It's the right way to write for this class, but it's not conversational. It's not like the discussion where we're discussing things back and forth, and we might use inclusive pronouns like we are going to do this, or they said that. In formal writing, there is no we. Who would we be? Yourself and who else? So you got to be more specific. And again, the articles that we read are very good examples of the style that you should develop. Another point that students sometimes are very weak on is using transitions. As you write a paper, it's got to flow. It's got to connect things together. So your introduction should lead to the main ideas that then start to be addressed in the body of the paper. And even within the body of the paper, the sections themselves need to have transitions between them that show how one idea connects to another idea. And again, if you look at the scholarly articles that we're reading, you'll see the authors make a deliberate attempt to tie things together. And when they don't, you'll notice it's very difficult to follow what they're saying. Okay? So it's the same thing. When I read your paper and you've got two different ideas and no transition between them, I don't know how you expect them to be connected. You do not want to put the burden of figuring out the logic of your paper on the reader, because they'll simply say, this person either doesn't know what they're talking about or they haven't put the effort into making it clear to the reader. So make it very clear to the reader what you mean, and transitions is an important part of that. Number 5 down here is paper's content. And here we're kind of getting into more of what you would call the quality of the paper. So we've moved away from simply the style and the format and the mechanics into what did you decide to write about. And here it's going to be important not to simply write a review of the articles and say, well, this article said this, and this article said this, and this article said this. But you're actually going to, in the introduction of your paper, define what your paper is going to show. Many times I say, start out and say, this paper will show that, and then you explain what the paper is going to show. Then the rest of the paper is showing it using the literature. Okay, so don't simply restate the assignment question. Make up your own thesis statement, but make sure it's in a form of what you're planning on doing, what we call an argumentative style of paper, where your thesis statement proposes what you're going to argue, just like a lawyer would. An attorney would propose, I'm going to show you that my client is innocent, and this is the way I'm going to do it. Well, that's essentially what you're doing with your introduction, your thesis statement, and then the evidence that you present through the literature. So what I'm looking for is not really evidence of your creative writing ability, but really evidence in terms of your ability to take a subject and come up with a good idea about how you want to approach it. So creativity at this stage is really, since you're not doing your own individual research at this point, you're basically writing what you know about what other people have written. Your creativity is going to be in the way you put things together. So, for example, let's just look at the topic for this week's paper. Write a 5 to 7 page paper synthesizing the main theories and literature covered in the first 2 weeks. Well, the first week talked about is strategic management actually an academic field? What is the purpose of theory? And some of the issues about the development of strategic management, its history, its background, what it's built upon, and so on. Okay, that was week 1. Week 2, we go into Mintzberg, and we look at Mintzberg's view of the subject. So what I commonly get is simply a article review, which simply says, this is what this paper said, and this is what this paper said, and this is what this paper said. This is what this theory is, this is what this theory is. Well, that shows me that you read it, and you're now giving me a review, but the main point is not to do that, but to look at the entire package, look at the entire 2 weeks and say, what sort of a paper can I write? What theme can I find that can draw the majority of this literature together? And I can actually say something about the entire 2 weeks of literature and then support that position based upon the individual articles. Okay, this is not simple. This is something you got to think about. Okay, so that's the idea. And when you can do that, you will get outstanding grades, because that's really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for your ability to come up with fresh ideas out of existing material, and that is the essence of coming up with a dissertation topic. So, creativity will be based upon kind of the idea that you come up with, that you want to, how you're going to bring this material together, and then how you're going to synthesize it to explain the supporting evidence for your thesis statement, what you say your paper is going to do. And I think I've mentioned in earlier classes Bloom's taxonomy and how we move away from simply describing something or explaining something into synthesizing and integrating and analyzing and evaluating. Number 7 is one of the more important ones from my perspective, because everybody starts out writing at a different level, and the main purpose in taking in education is showing improvement. So I'll look at the first paper and see what you've done. I'll look at the second paper and compare it to the first and see that you've improved in various ways. And by the third paper, the fourth paper, I should see definite improvement from the first 2 weeks, and you should too. You should see that you're doing a better job. You have a better understanding of how you're doing it. You're getting fewer bad comments on your papers than you were in the beginning. So this is the last thing that I look at. So the keys to success are pretty much wrapped up in what I've just been talking about. You're going to be using the literature. The whole point is coming to understand what's been said about the field. You're going to be trying to put it into your own words, but you're going to be synthesizing what others have said. You're going to build your definitions, your conclusions, your points based upon what, in this case, Mintzberg might have said, or the other articles Sotheby has said, what the other authors have said in the first 2 weeks of literature. And finally, the more authorities you can add to your argument, the stronger your case. Just like a lawyer, the more evidence he has, whether it's forensics evidence, eyewitnesses, but the more you can bring into the courtroom and say, this proves my point, and I have this, and I have this, and I have this, the more you can do that, the stronger your case is, and the less likely you're going to run into somebody who says, well, I don't think you've got enough evidence here. You're not proving your point. Plus, you haven't even looked at this body of evidence that says something different. So you're really, as again, preparing for your defending your ideas, you really want to have as much evidence as you have time to gather. Okay, well, to wrap things up here, we have our strategy cartoon of the week, and moving away from Dilbert, at least for 1 week here, we have the Savage Chickens, who say that if you become strategic, you may never have to produce anything tangible again. Okay, so until next time, let me know if you have any questions, and goodbye and luck.